seated as possible. If you can, scoot in, let others join you. Thank you very much.
He's consistent in his constitutional principles. He never varies. He reads this thing, he believes it, and he obeys it. I'm going to give him a sign. He never plays to an audience or to a group. There will be questions. When he's asking questions that you filtered into the question asking, you will get the right answer. You won't be played to. He's faithful to his oath, and he's willing to take the long road. I want to just allude to a couple of people that are my heroes really quickly. How many of you have heard of William Wilberforce? He fought slavery alone in the British Empire in the 1780s, and he's the man that took it down. It was a long, lonely road, and he was often alone in his votes. Does that sound familiar? Dr. Paul works tirelessly to educate his fellow legislators and us so that we understand the concepts of the Constitution that the founders gave us in the Constitution. He continually brings liberty issues to the table. He inspires many with his tireless work and devotion to freedom. In fact, I believe, in Idaho, he's the godfather of the state's rights movement. So we talked about William Wilberforce, secondly, and then to the last one before I introduce Dr. Paul, John Quincy Adams. And this is in reverse order. John Quincy Adams was president, then he was a legislator, a House of Representatives, and he fought slavery from 1820 to 1848. He was so instrumental in bringing slavery down in this country. And they actually imposed a gag rule on him in Congress. They didn't want him to talk about it. Just like the press has gagged Dr. Paul. But today, we have press here. I'm confident we're going to see something about this. At any rate, John Quincy Adams was called the Hellhound of Abolition. Now, I looked up in the thesaurus words that work with hellhound that we could use today, and I didn't find any. But Dr. Paul is our messenger of liberty. His stands are always for personal liberty. He is an advocate of liberty. He's our John Quincy Adams, and we will send him in reverse, from the hill to the house. Yeah! He's called the champion of the Constitution. In Idaho, he's the strengthener of the states, and I want to welcome and ask you to stand with me and welcome our herald of liberty, Dr. Bonner County.
Before I get started, I want to introduce you, if you have not yet met, my wife of 25 years, Carol. One of our grandchildren that has lived in is traveling with us. But it makes me feel good to see the enthusiasm in what some people might call a small town, but a very important town for the cause of liberty. It's great to see you. It's wonderful. A lot of people in this country today are very concerned, and rightfully so. And it's not that our problems developed overnight, last year or 2 years ago. We have been careless as people in this country over many, many years And we have slipped a long way from the intent of the Constitution and what the founders gave us. They didn't give us perfection, but they gave us a very good document. But so far, we have allowed it to be undermined, and that's why we're in this mess. If that's the reason we're in this mess, because we have not had individuals in Washington defending the Constitution, guess what? The solution isn't difficult. Send only people to Washington who have read the Constitution, understood it, and you can believe that they will uphold the Constitution. That was whether it comes to economic issues, monetary issues, the entitlement system, whether it comes up with our foreign policy and personal liberties, the Constitution was designed to keep the federal government very, very small. And when the government is small, the people are big. And the people have their liberties and they have their responsibilities. We have our responsibility to run our lives as we see fit, run our intellectual lives, run our religious lives as we see fit, and we suffer the consequences on what we do. We are obligated to take care of ourselves, and we are not able to expect, as so many do today, others to take care of us when we don't do the job ourselves. This is what was intended. There's a lot of talk about the benefits of democracy, but guess what? The founders did not like democracy. They warned us against democracy. They said you should have a republic, and that democracy could be very dangerous, and it would change the nature of government if we accepted blindly the concept of democracy. But we're there today because if you can get 51% of the people living off the 49, and they have the votes, guess what? We get what we have today. And unfortunately also, when it is known that a certain segment can rule another segment, the special interests really pile on. And they pretend they're taking the 51% to take care of the downtrodden never seem to get the help. But those who are in special places, those who know how to work the lobbying system, those who know how to buy influence in Washington in the campaigns, all of a sudden, guess what? They make the money when the times are good, and they're the ones who get bailed out, and we need to reverse that. That is not fair to the middle class and poor people. Most of you know that one issue that I've talked about a lot, in a constitutional way, a moral way, as well as an economic way, and that, of course, is the money issue. And the money issue is something that was a very important issue for the founders. They put into the Constitution that you could not use paper money, that you only could use gold and silver as legal tender, and that you do not have the authority to establish a central bank. If we would obey the Constitution, guess what? There would be no Federal Reserve System at all. The system had morphed into something where the majority, if you can get control of that, you can dictate to the others. It becomes unfair. Just the very nature of debasing a currency, devaluing the currency, diluting the currency, which has been happening ever since we've had a Federal Reserve. There is an automatic transfer of wealth from the middle class to some special privileged class. Because the middle class gets to use the money last when it's worth less and prices go up, so you pay an invisible tax. This argument that half the people in this country don't pay taxes, that's not exactly true, because it is the poorer half who actually gets the lack of benefits because they get the inflation. People on Wall Street, do they care whether gasoline is $4 or $5 a gallon? No. And this whole system is designed to purposely devalue the currency. This is what they believe has to be done to liquidate the bad debt that they've run up. So it's not an accident. But the real tragedy is we undermine what we were given. We were given a free market system with sound money, property rights, contract rights, and a minimal federal government. We gave up on that. The federal government is huge right now. And the bigger a government gets, the less liberties the individuals have. And that is why we're facing this crisis today. So the answer cannot be found in making the government bigger. The government has to be restrained. The spending has to be restrained. there's a lot of talk in Washington, there's talk by the other candidates, they talk about the spending and the cutting back, but there's no serious talk about it. Believe me, there is a proposed rate of increase for the next 10 years of about $10 trillion. If they talk about cutting that anything, they're talking about cutting a little bit of the proposed increases. That is not a cut, that is deception, and what we have to do is have real cut, and that is the reason that I have proposed in the first year to cut real cuts of $1 trillion out of the budget. Some people get a little bit nervous because they have been indoctrinated by some false assumptions of an economic theory that said, if the government spends the money, we will have prosperity. But the opposite is true. When the government spends the money, they take the money from the people and the special interests get the benefits. So the benefit, if you cut $1 trillion out of the government spending, guess what? The people get to spend $1 trillion, not the government. Of course, what we have to do is maintain an incentive so that the people have the incentive to work and save. There's no incentive to save today. Why should you save money that's losing money rapidly? 5%, 10%. Bernanke invests 2%. I told him the other day, I said, nobody believes it. Nobody believes it's 2%. So what's the purpose of saving? And they don't even want us to save. They don't want the government to save. They want to spend. They believe, the opposition to free markets, the Keynesian economists believe that spending is the engine of a good time, even if it runs up deficits. And exactly the opposite. If you want to get ahead, you want to work hard and not consume every penny you earn so that you can save for your future or invest it or earn interest or whatever. So it is the opposite. Today, the federal government would wish that you would all spend more money and that would solve the problem. So they're encouraging people to spend money, and this is supposed to stimulate the economy. But what happens if you've lost your job? Or what happens if you're worried about losing your job? What if you're already maxed out? What if you're worried about paying your mortgages? How can you increase spending to satisfy a deeply flawed economic theory? Well, you just can't. It's impossible to do it. So they have an answer to that. They said, well, then the government has to spend the money. And if the government can spend the money, even if it runs up debt, it's worthwhile. And even if you can't borrow the money, don't worry about it. We'll just print the money. And the American people now, guess what? They no longer believe in that theory anymore. They caught on, they're fed up, they don't believe debt is good, they don't believe that borrowing is good, and they don't believe just printing the money when you need it is of any value to any of us. It undermines everything we're trying to do, and that is why we have to address the subject of the Federal Reserve. They've destroyed 99% of the value of our dollars since they took over in 1913. So on the 100th anniversary, this is what I suggest. Let's have a celebration and have a bill and pass the bill and repeal the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Ultimately, in a society, there's always monetary reform because this is not new to destroy a currency. But the resistance has to come from the average person, the middle class, because the privileged class, those who get the benefits and get the contracts, in the banking system and the military-industrial complex, they will fight us tooth and nails on this. But it's for the people that you have to have sound money. If you have to work for a living, like most of us do, you have to work for a living, you want to be paid with something honest that maintains its value. You don't want to get paid in something that is rapidly losing its value. So it's the middle class, it's the average people that have always demanded monetary reforms. Also, the market is so powerful that the market will bring about these changes. The Fed, of course, the most important thing we can do with the Fed right now is get a full audit, and I think the American people would know why we don't need to go. Probably what will happen is this whole system is sort of self-destruct, and that's dangerous. That's what I'm trying so desperately to prevent, and I've talked about this for 35 years, but we're at a point now where it's very close to tipping over. because the world is involved. The dollars that we have created have become the reserve currency of the world, and that's like being able to print gold. So all other economies have their basis of their monetary of gold. Even the Chinese, they hold about $1.5 trillion, and they're getting nervous about this. They're starting to spend this money. So the end stage has come rather rapidly. That's what we have to prevent, and that is the reason that we have to cut the spending. Now, a lot of people get very nervous. They say, well, there's a lot of people who are very dependent on the government, which is true, way too many. And some of the programs that were designed to help people are bankrupt. If you look at Social Security, they don't have any money in the bank. They have credits. They've spent this money on the wars and overseas spending, and they can't depend on this. But if you have priorities, I think you could protect certain individuals who have become so dependent and they wouldn't be taken care of. That is, the promises ought to be met at all costs to take care of the people whose money we took from them for Social Security. Try our very best to make sure that they have money of real value and their standard of living does not go down. The Medicare system, the medical care for the elderly and young people, children. I think we should work very hard to try to take care of those individuals, but we still have to cut a lot. Now, I would think that the easiest place for us to get an agreement on where to cut would be the overseas spending. That does not help us at all. The military spending right now is estimated to be over $1 trillion overseas. Now, we are instructed by the Constitution to have a strong national defense, and that is an obligation. But just to spend money for military operations, building more bases, bombing more countries, invading more countries, occupying more countries, pretending that we can change them and go into nation building and solve every border dispute is absolutely detrimental to our national defense, and that requires that we change our foreign policy to the defense of this country and not to be the policeman of the world. The debt that was added on in the past 10 years for our operations in the Middle East is $4 trillion. Just think the simple arithmetic of saying, if we had not spent that $4 trillion on wars that were not declared, not in our best interest, nobody had threatened us, nobody had invaded us or attacked us, if we would have just avoided these unconstitutional wars, $4 trillion would have been left in this economy, and that is a much better way to spend $4 trillion than blowing up people all around the world, just making more enemies. So I would say this should bring us together. Not only we as conservatives and Republicans and independents, but there's no reason in the world why liberals and Democrats wouldn't come together on this. If they truly care about the responsibility of individuals here in this country, why shouldn't it be that we couldn't bring all the people together and say, debt is a problem, spending is a problem, this kind of war spending, it will be much easier if we want to do anything, if we have any chance at all of taking care of our people here at home. Under conditions of today, where we spend too much and run up deficit, the economy is weakened. We don't have a free market. You know, when we had our depression, the economists at that time were just moving into the fold, and they were the Keynesian economists, and they said, "See, we told you, capitalism and gold standards were terrible," and they brought on the depression. It's an absolute lie. It isn't true. It was the Federal Reserve, along with intervention by government, that brought us the depression and prolonged the depression. And the other fallacy is that, and some are encouraging it today, they said the only way you can get out of a deep depression is a war. That is total nonsense. you cannot get richer by going to war. You have to get poorer. So therefore, don't look for war bailing out this economy. We didn't get out of the Depression until 1947, after the war was over, and we slashed spending and slashed taxes and brought 10 million people back home again. That's what we need to do now. Most people now can see that the big issue today is the economy. We want jobs and we want prosperity. We don't like to see the shrinking middle class. We don't like to see some people benefiting and at the expense of others. But we do need to change the structure because we do not have a free market. You can't have a free market with the secretive Federal Reserve printing money and creating financial bubbles. Because the financial bubbles are created, some people feel good about it, but eventually a bubble has to burst and then you have a recession. And after many decades, those recessions become a depression. So it's not a recession. You're in the midst of a downturn that's been going on for about 14 years. If you look carefully at the statistics, there have been no significant new jobs since the year 2000. So if we have to recognize the significance of monetary policy, we have to recognize the significance of tax policy, both nationally and state-wise. Taxes will impede incentives to produce. Also, artificially keeping wage rates are very detrimental to compete around the world. So government shouldn't be involved. They shouldn't have either wage controls on the top level or the bottom level. You have to have a free market to price wages. But you also have to deregulate this economy. Every time there's a problem caused by government, they create the demand for more and more regulations, and that dampens the recovery. In the Depression, they passed a lot of regulations, and that prolonged the Depression. Now we have, when we had Enron fail, Republicans put on Sarbanes-Oxley. And they say, well, we need more regulations. What it did, it added problems, because it has now added $1 trillion of cost to our business people with a program designed by conservative Republicans. So when they talk about deregulations, they say, yeah, you may talk about it now, but what did you do? You gave us regulation. Adding on Dodd-Frank. Now, in this burden of Obamacare, no wonder business people are cautious about going on, just laying on more and more regulations. So we have to stop laying on more regulations, stop passing all these laws. The other day I read a story that said that January 1st was a bad first day of the year. I'll talk about one bill later. But one thing happened on January 1st. Somebody added up and found out there were 40,000 new laws put into effect on January 1st. Now, how can we even comprehend this and think of the cost of this? So we need to stop it. I'd like to see the day, if it is to be that I'm to be your president, I'd like to see a year where we get rid of 40,000 laws in one day. Automatic increase of the regulations on the Federal Register, wouldn't it be nice to say, well, last year we got rid of 10,000 pages on the Federal Register. Let the people go. Let them produce. Let them have their jobs and let them keep the fruits of their labor. Give them the incentive to go back to work. It's a philosophic and a moral issue. Jefferson was very clear where our rights come from. They come from the government. Our life and our liberty comes from our Creator. In a natural way. If we own our lives and we own our liberty and we own our own responsibility and we have to be responsible for ourselves, we should at least be given the right to keep the fruits of our labor. Under those circumstances, it doesn't take much to figure out what the tax code would be. The tax code would not include also a process, an amendment passed in 1913. When the true republic returns in this country, we will repeal the 16th Amendment and you will be allowed to keep what you're doing. The income tax be reduced and eventually eliminated. Corporate taxes are a burden. Corporate taxes, sticking to the corporation. The truth is that corporate taxes are nothing more than a sales tax. If they're going to stay in business, they have to pass this on. What about the attack on capital when you have inheritance taxes? You know, it doesn't take too long to get into that category for you when you're at the time to pass your estate on to your children, that the government comes in and say, well, we want this share. We're part owners. This means they assume the ownership of what you own. You paid money, you pay taxes to build a business or a farm or have your assets. Then they come in and say, well, we're going to take our share. So in a way, they're saying they own it. But this undermines capital. This destroys capital. It breaks up businesses, breaks up farms. So you want a tax structure that encourages this. Right now we have a tax code that says if you make money overseas in an American corporation, then you get taxed overseas, but if you want to bring that money back home and build a business here, you get taxed again. So why would they bring it back? They'll keep it overseas. So we should get rid of those kind of taxes and encourage people to come back and build manufacturing plants in this country. That is what we need. The solution can't be found. It can be found in our traditions. I haven't invented what I consider the solutions. The founders gave it. It's been a long time studying and understanding over the centuries what true liberty is like. But the real test of liberty was in the United States of America. We had the freest country, and we've had the most prosperous country, but that is not so anymore. We now still have prosperity, which is apparent. You go out, you still see nice houses and cars, but the truth is, it's not paid for. It's based on debt. There's too much debt. And even during the Depression, we were a creditor nation, which meant foreigners owed us money. Now we're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. And we owe literally trillions and trillions of dollars to countries like Japan and China. And we're not, at a point where we have reversed this. As we spend too much money overseas, fighting these wars we shouldn't spend and shouldn't be fighting, we borrow the money from overseas, from Japan and, ironically, China. They sell us a lot of goods, so they accumulate a lot of dollars. What else do they do with their money? Are they invading countries? No, they don't happen to be doing this right now. But they are investing in other countries, in the very countries we're fighting wars. They're literally investing in Iran, Afghanistan, in Iraq, throughout the countries in Africa. So they're acting almost like capitalists, and yet we're acting like aggressors. We go into these countries, and we now accept a policy called preemptive war. Preemptive war means we get to start it. And that is wrong. That is wrong. That is not. A war should go, we should have wars very infrequently, very cautiously, and the founders said we would do much better off if the king, the president, the executive branch does not have the authority. The authority only can come from the people through their votes of the members of Congress for a declaration of war. The case would be an awful lot less wars being fought, and that, of course, would be a tremendous economic benefit to us. But we need to do these things if we want to get the economy growing again and the jobs coming back. But there's another thing that happens under these conditions of always emergency, economic emergency after 9/11, wars going on, and the assumption is made, and unfortunately too many Americans have gone on with this, they assume that under these emergency conditions that we're supposed to, and we're expected to give up some of our liberties to be safe and secure. That is never necessary. You never should give up your liberties, even no matter what they tell you about your safety and your security. What happened with the financial bubble. The very wealthy, those who were making billions, said there's going to be a depression, we need bailed out, we're too big to bail. Of course, the Federal Reserve went into that. They actually churned through $15 trillion. But half of that $15 trillion was sent overseas to banks overseas and central banks overseas and other governments that got the bailout. And we're preparing to do that again because the debt crisis has gotten worse. It hasn't gotten any better. All they're depending on is the faith and confidence that the dollar will continue to buy and it will be accepted around the world. But it's impossible to accept that to last forever because it is being less accepted now. Eventually it will be destroyed, and that's when we will definitely have to go back to work. But we do something sensibly, we can work our way out of this and gradually, take care of the people we need to and bring our troops home and cut back and live within our means like families have to do and business people have to do. If you're in business and you get into this trouble, either go out of business or you have to, borrow more money or go into bankruptcy unless you're too big to fail. And then you get bailed out with people. So it's a very, very unfair system. But under these conditions of crises and people with willingness to give up too much, right after 9/11, within a week or so, there was a bill passed that had been floating around for a couple of years they wanted to pass. And they rammed it through. It was a new version. Nobody really had time to read it. And it was passed almost overwhelmingly over my strong objection, and that was the Patriot Act. Patriot Act, if it would have been called by its authentic name, which was repealing the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe they wouldn't have voted for it. That's what I think. Has set the stage for the invasion by our governments at all levels without proper search warrants. And they can do that. Just think of what they do to us at airports without proper search warrants. And that is something that should be an insult to all Americans because not one single thing they've ever done at the airports has actually made us safer. It has only undermined our dignity and our liberties, and we ought to. Also, I mentioned earlier that there was, the many bills that were passed on January 1st, but there was one signed by the President, which was a really, really bad piece of legislation. That was the National Defense Authorization Act. Of course, many of you know that that is the bill that legalized the elimination of the principle of posse comitatus, that the U.S. military was not to be involved in law enforcement domestically within the states. That was a state responsibility. But it canceled that out. The military, the federal military now can arrest any American citizen who is a suspect. Not charged, just a suspect. They call it associated forces. If you become associated by website, emails, meetings, or whatever that they think is a suspicious group, you can be arrested, held without an attorney, put in a prison indefinitely and in secrecy. That cannot be part of what America is supposed to be about. The President unilaterally, by himself, a year ago, announced in a Senate hearing by one of his staff people, he came and said, the President now has established a policy that he can assassinate an American citizen. On his saying, with no charges, no trial, but if the President determines he's a dangerous person, he can be assassinated. Well, so to prove his point, he's done it. But some of the people who die, some of the people who receive a bomb coming from one of our drones, sometimes they're innocent people die. But that is now the law of the land. And our whole purpose of the Revolution and the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, and our Ninth and Tenth Amendment that the states are supposed to take these from, this has been undermined. This has to, that trend has to be reversed. And that is why I think something is happening. People have awakened. 4 years ago, the people weren't nearly as annoyed, but with the economic crisis, people know this is very, very serious. And with the perpetuation of war, 80% of the American people now are talking about, what are we doing in Afghanistan? It's time to come home from Afghanistan. Because we have great traditions and we did have rule of law, we are not in the same fix that the Soviet Union was. They got into trouble economically. We did not have to fight a nuclear war with them. And unfortunately, their economic policies were deeply flawed and they failed. And instead of ushering in an age of peace, we, of course, assumed the rule of the world policeman, which has given us the predicament of overextending ourselves around the world. So that, unfortunately, is what we're about to face. But the good part is we don't have to invent the solution. The solution has been known, it's been worked on for many hundreds of years, but it's only been really well tested in this country. And yet, in the last 100 years, I would say that we have drifted a long way from that. So all we have to do is look at our traditions, look at what the law was, look at what sound mind was about, look at what voluntary contracts are all about, look about individual liberties and local government. That is what we have to revive. And we can solve these problems if we would just be convinced of it, that those are the answer. And not be always blindly hopeful that said, well, you know, the federal government can take care of us from cradle to grave. And the other day somebody on the TV said, well, such and such, the federal government, are you against the federal government spending this money? I said, the federal government has no money. They only have money that they steal from people. Our solutions are available to us. The determination is growing by leaps and bounds. It's so different than 4 years ago, whether it's the war issue, the economic issue, or the very important issue of the monetary policy. 80-some% of the American people now say the very least we have to have, of course, is the audit of the Federal Reserve. So people are coming our way and they're understanding this, and therefore we just have to get the message across. People are waking up. Washington, unfortunately, they're still sound asleep. Talk about spending, they're not spending. Talking about liberty, they don't understand about the Patriot Act. Talk about a strong foreign policy, that means you have to invade Syria and then go on to Iran. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about real liberty, not this fake stuff. Freedom works. It brings people together. You know, instead of being divisive, we should come together. Not because we would use our freedoms the same way. We use our religious freedom differently. We use our intellectual freedoms in a different manner. But we don't seem to be as willing to accept social freedoms and let people live their lives as they choose because they might be different. And therefore we become more challenged. Say, well, we need the government to say that so they don't do such things that we don't approve of. And others will say, well, people won't take care of themselves and therefore we have to make sure we have an economic safety net for everybody. But if you trust and understand freedom, you should bring all kinds of people together because they get to use their freedom the way they want to. They get to spend the money the way they want to do it. They can have their social beliefs that they want. And in that case, we should bring all people together for the defense of liberty. I sincerely believe that is where we can find our answer if we truly want to restore the greatness and the prosperity of America and the peace that we all desire. We can find it in our traditions. All we need is determination, and quite frankly, we might be able to send a very strong message tomorrow from this very state saying that is the message that we want to have. We have to have is a candidate who can best beat Obama. So, and just like I described a little while ago, people should come together, and we do get, you know, in an audience like this, quite frankly, we get a lot of young people who have not made up their minds, have never been involved before, a lot of people who have dropped out that are coming back in, a lot of independents, and lo and behold, we get a lot of Democrats sort of supporting our cause. Thank you. Now, some executive orders, very few, of course, are legitimate. If a president writes an order to fulfill a constitutional responsibility, it would be an executive order, say, to write an order if you're the commander-in-chief and you have to deal with military conversation, time of war. And on some occasions, executive orders are proper, but not what's happening now. It was, I guess, about a month or so ago, our president said that, well, the Congress is moving too slowly, and we have to have these environmental regulations written, and we have to have them as emergency. So he says, I'm just going to use an executive order. That is illegal, unconstitutional, and we should cancel that with another executive order.
As an evangelical Christian, why should I vote for Ron Paul?
Well, why should an evangelical Christian vote for Ron Paul? Well, because the same reason that everybody else should vote for liberty. I mean, why? It's sort of, if somebody's religion is zero, they are a non-believer, somebody is a Catholic, somebody is a Jew, somebody is an evangelical Christian, everybody should vote for liberty because we want our independence. We want our freedom of choice protected. So we all should come together. Now, sometimes when the question is asked like that, will you support some special benefits of a certain group and therefore in disagreement with the other group? But liberty protects us all as long as you don't use force to bring about changes for the benefit of another group. And I think that is the most important thing and why we should support.